Zhejiang, Canada. We must exit the WHO.
Meet in Geneva on June 1st for the We Are the Change rally and March to the Future.
The time has come to make our voices heard. Join us in Place des Nations, United Nations HQ in Geneva on June 1st, and be part of the largest freedom rally ever seen. They are few, but we are 8 billion. Together, we can and will make a difference. Share this call with all your friends, family, and colleagues. Together.
All right. Greetings, everybody. Welcome to the show. It's Armor of Truth Live, number 313. All right, one of these days we'll get this. There we go. Welcome to the show, folks. Here we are. Summer, say hello to the crowd.
Hello.
This huge crowd that we've got here tonight. Secret meetings of the drafting group are being held, have been held today and in the days before during the World Health Assembly. And they're working hard to try to finalize the negotiations regarding a couple specific points in the pandemic agreement. We'll listen to some of it today, and there were about 15 nations abstained from voting on the resolution they put forward today. And what it was a lot of Muslim majority nations were distancing themselves from the language, some of the gender inclusive language. And it was also some problems with the idea in this resolution where they felt like, well, the U.S. and Europe and the UK felt like there wasn't enough attention being paid to the way health emergencies affect women. So it's, so they're caught up. They're caught up in a bit of a controversy among themselves, but they're still trying. If you had heard that pandemic treaty had failed, well, that's not exactly true. They're still trying to push it through. Before we get started, let me remind you guys of something that Donald Trump, who's obviously been in the news today, we play a clip of something that he did back in May of 2020. Of course, this is after he got warp speed started. But then there was this move, which was the right move. Listen to this.
Result of the malfeasance of the Chinese government. China.
Yeah, hang on a second. It's going to be right there.
This cover-up of the Wuhan virus allowed the disease to spread all over the world, instigating a global pandemic that has cost more than 100,000 American lives and over 1 million lives worldwide. Chinese officials ignored their reporting obligations to the World Health Organization.
I can't help it. Look at Mnuchin. Mnuchin is right there to Trump's left. Does he look like a toy soldier? Check it out. So, you see that?
It's funny.
Mnuchin. Yeah, that is quite, he is at attention. Anyway, check this out. Check out what Trump did back on, I think this is May 29th of 2020.
And pressured the World Health Organization to mislead the world when the virus was first discovered by Chinese authorities. Countless lives have been taken and profound economic hardship has been inflicted all around the globe. They strongly recommended against me doing the early ban from China, but I did it anyway and was proven to be 100% correct. China has total control over the World Health Organization, despite only paying $40 million per year compared to what the United States has been paying, which is approximately $450 million a year. We have detailed the reforms that it must make and engage with them directly, but they have refused to act. Because they have failed to make the requested and greatly needed reforms, we will be today terminating our relationship with the World Health Organization and redirecting those funds to other worldwide and deserving urgent global public health needs. The world needs answers from China on the virus. We must.
Yeah, so there you go. The Don was at it on that day. On that particular day, he did the right thing. Well, final votes at the World Health Assembly are going to be held Saturday, June 1st. And as James Roguski, I'm going to quote James Roguski, and I'm going to second this motion. He said on his Substack, I really don't know why people are celebrating, taking credit for things that they misunderstand and have been misrepresenting now for a couple years. He said the WHO negotiations are likely to continue for months. It's possible that it goes on for years. All right, we've got what do we have, Summer? On our Substack, we've got an article up there. Mm-hmm. You introduce it. I'll try to pull it up here because I'm a pro. I should have had that ready. Our latest article, Hidden Tyranny.
That's right. It's a very extensive article that we've researched. It's taken many hours, and many sources, many primary sources to look through to sort out what is actually happening with the World Health Organization and with the pandemic agreement, which they call the pandemic treaty. And one of the things that's alarming is people within the movement. So, we're supposed to think that these people are representing our viewpoint and that they're on our side. For example, the Road to Geneva or the Freedom Convoy. These types, they seem to be honing in on some facets of the argument that are very problematic. And this paper fleshes out the arguments, and we very much encourage you. It's quite long, but maybe you could just digest it in parts, and it's really worth the undertaking to check out the research that we've put together for you. Okay, so the point of this article, the title, Hidden Tyranny, the WHO is not the greatest threat to American sovereignty. The WHO is not the primary threat right now at all. Again, Summer, here we go. Mm-hmm. Here we go. Yeah. Alienating everyone in the audience. Making friends with everybody. Again, folks, we're not here to make friends. It would be lovely to make friends along the way, but we've got to tell you the truth. And this is the truth. Yeah, where the research points, where the evidence points. Yeah, follow the evidence. You follow the evidence. Where it leads. Everybody's talking about sovereignty and that it's in the pandemic agreement. Yeah. And it's just not, actually. And we've pulled that out. And it is in there, but not in the way they think. Not in the way that they think. Let me give you this quote from James Madison, 1787. Now, these men who founded the nation, who crafted the Constitution, knew exactly what they do. They had a specific kind of tyranny in mind. And he said, if tyranny and oppression come to this land, it will be in the guise of fighting a foreign enemy. Abraham Lincoln said something very similar. This nation will not be taken down from the outside. If it comes down, it will be from within. And then Madison says, and it would probably be in the guise of we're fighting some foreign enemy. That's not actually an enemy. Now, I'm not in any way, let's just clarify right now, we're not in any way saying that the WHO is a good thing. No, they need to be shut down. The right thing is what Trump said right there. And there is a bill right now, H.R. 79, that you can contact your representative. I guess this is. Well, I'd like to clarify, though, that we wouldn't. I'm not particularly fond of what Trump said about China. I think that's kind of. That's Never mind all that. Yeah, but the right thing. The solution is we need to exit the WHO, and we've made that abundantly clear. But we're going to flesh it out even deeper tonight. Yeah. So what you see in the Substack article, we're gonna go into detail on a couple of those points, but we're going to give you something completely. We're going to go further tonight. In fact, I'm going to give you the solution. I'm going to tell you what is the greatest threat to American sovereignty. Stay tuned. First of all, let's start out a little clown show there for you, just for fun. There we go. Let's start out, Summer. Let's go ahead and start out and deal with this fact of what, for example, what do the international health regulations say about sovereignty? We'll deal with the pandemic agreement, accord, framework, convention, many names. One thing it is not a treaty. And we'll explain this in detail for you. You hear this rhetoric a lot, and again, I want to extend on what Summer said earlier. We're not trying to call people out. We want to make contact with these folks. The folks at the convoy who went to Geneva. There's a very important element of this that people are missing. So, in the interest of sovereignty, let's just look at the international health regulations from them. Let me bring you up to date here. First of all, let's listen to Russell Brand. This is the sentiment, right? People are excited because they're convinced that we've won something.
The WHO treaty has been altered because of your resistance. What you awoke to years ago is finally reaching the Senate, because 49 senators are set to oppose this treaty. Let's have a look at the letter that's been written by these senators. Some of over 300 proposals for amendments made by member states would substantially increase the WHO's health emergency powers and constitute intolerable infringements upon US sovereignty. As such, it was essential that the WHO abide by the 4-month notice period to allow member states to ensure that no traces of such proposals were included in a final amendment package for consideration by the World Health Authority. Having failed to do so, amendments are not in order.
All right, so basically the idea here is, okay, let's celebrate because we got these senators to send this letter to President Biden. And as we'll get to in a moment, Meryl Nass and others have been promoting Bill HR 1425. That is a bill that calls for Senate ratification of any pandemic treaty or any significant or any changes at all to the IHR, the pandemic treaty, as they're calling it. There's a huge problem with that, and I'm not going to keep you in suspense. The main problem with doing it that way, and we'll explain all this for you in just a bit, exactly what is the relationship between the United States and the WHO and the United Nations for that matter, and how do these agreements actually work? Who's actually in charge? Who's actually the one threatening your sovereignty? All right. If you have the Senate vote on or to ratify or approve the pandemic treaty, then what happens after that is it sets a precedent. It legalizes them. It puts them into another area. It actually turns that thing into a treaty. Now, some of you might be saying it, but I've heard people say that this thing is a threat to our sovereignty. Tedros is going, when he declares a public health emergency of international concern, he declares one, and he can do it for just about any reason, and all that's true. When he does that, we have to do whatever they say. We are suddenly subjects of the WHO. Is that true? The question is that actually true? Does anybody know? Is anybody drilling down on that point to find out, is that true? Is that a valid statement? Well, it's not a valid statement. And look, it's not like we knew this all along. We've really dug into this over the past,
couple weeks, actually.
Couple weeks, yeah, maybe 3 weeks.
Where we had an epiphany within the last couple of weeks.
I was just concerned. I was like, okay, I've been assuming that, yeah, if this thing happens, that it'll definitely affect our sovereignty in some way. Well, but I never knew exactly. Well, it turns out you have to read the documents. And I was as guilty as anybody of, just skimming them, looking for the things that stood out, inclusive language and this and that. Well, you have to read the documents. You have to go in there and look for the answers. You actually have to do your research. So leading up to today.
Well, you know, it also took just this great flood of senators coming forward to bring this to light, though, to see the Senate become active and do all this voting and all these bills coming out. So that's what prompted this next wave of understanding about how it actually works.
Right. That's the big problem. Do not assume that your elected officials understand this relationship between the United States and the WHO, because clearly most of them do not understand it. James Rogoski here says that one battle appears to have been won. This is on, I think it was it last Friday? Yeah, they didn't get the agreement finished. They didn't get the draft agreements. They didn't come to agreement on all of the points and the issues before the World Health Assembly, which is going on right now from last Monday through Saturday. Saturday is the day when they'll have all the votes. And it did. James is right. It looked like, well, at least we won this small battle. The war for our health freedoms is still going on, though. It's not a sprint, it's a marathon. Yeah, he says the final meeting of the 9th meeting of the intergovernmental negotiating body was held on Friday, May 24th, and they failed to come to the agreement. Here it is. Let's listen just a bit of the licking the wounds.
Are our friends from the NGOs in the room? I guess so. The room looks fuller. That's good. Dear colleagues, we've come to the end of a roller coaster ride, I think. My intention actually, a while back, thinking about this moment, was that I had Precious be standing on this table singing a song while I was emptying a bottle of champagne over her head. But we're not going to do that today, of course, because we are not where we hoped we would be when we started this process. But we worked our butts off, to be honest. We worked so hard, all of us, you, us, the Secretariat. I think nobody can say that anybody has not been trying.
Jump ahead to Ted Roth.
Floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Roland. Thank you, Precious. I think you have said it all, starting from Roland and Precious, I think, what has to be said. But I will add a few words. First of all, you have given it your best. Even if the outcome is not what you want, I think normally if you...
Somber mood.
Since you have given it your best, there should not be any regrets.
All right. Oh, give the old college try, is what Ted Ross is saying here. Let's see. Here's James Rogoski's video. It's not over.
Well, he goes on to say too, Tedros, that they're not giving up by any stretch.
Oh yeah, no, they're not, and that's exactly what's happened this week. They're going on and they're fraudulently negotiating these things in secret. Still to this day, that's what they're doing.
And in fact, we can make the case that perhaps this is a planned failure.
And I did. That was one of the points that I was making in the article. Now, this article, by the way, is a collaboration of Summer's work and my work, our research
That's
together.
right.
Because this thing is 10,000 words.
It's a behemoth.
So what I was saying there is that one of the points that I was making here was that one. And let's see. Let me see if I can find.
Yeah, you were going to find the James Rogoski clip where he was sort of recapping.
Yeah, no, I was trying to get to the clip from this video, our video, the clip.
Oh, it's down there. You passed it.
How far down is it? It's here in the
almost there, almost there.
Yeah, it's in the section on sovereignty. Oh boy.
It's almost there. Keep going. So you guys can get a sense of how long it is. There it is.
Yeah, okay, this is just a little clip. I won't play it all, but you'll hear the beginning of it. Hear ye, you are the government, until you're not. So don't let that happen. If you're in America, by the Constitution's directive and God's command to have no fellowship with the unfruitful works of darkness, but rather expose them, then it's your duty as a free man or a free woman to inform your leaders, inform yourself, and then inform your leaders on how to do their job properly. They work for you, so you should remind them of that fact.
Faith is resistance.
Hi, my name is James Roguski, and the purpose of this video is to encourage everyone on planet Earth to speak out publicly and express your opinion in regards to what the WHO is currently doing and what they have done about the proposed pandemic treaty, which is currently being negotiated in secret. Over 300 amendments to the existing international health regulations, which is also currently being negotiated in secret. Please speak out about the amendments that were adopted last year.
Implementing the amended IHR shall enable member states to detect, prevent, and respond to public health emergencies and reduce the chance of pandemics. The world, however, requires a different level of legal mandates, such as the pandemic treaty, to navigate through a particular pandemic, should one occur, and it will. Prioritizing actions that may restrict individual liberties for pandemic control efforts are all necessary during a pandemic.
Negotiations should be stopped because of the crimes and the mistakes that have been made over the last 4 years. Call me directly, 310-619-3055. Please share this video and share this website. Speak up now
and
or
call
forever
James.
hold your peace.
Call him. Call James. He will talk to you. He will tell you what's up. Read it, blog it, Facebook it, buy time on NPR, tattoo it on your forehead, tell everyone you know about HR 79. While you're at it, let your senator, congressman, local officials in your city council also, let them know that you absolutely will not vote for someone who thinks it's a good idea to remain hitched to the WHO, and for that matter, the United Nations. Because the nation's founders went to great lengths, and hundreds of thousands of Americans have given their lives to ensure that the United States would not become entangled in conspiracies like this one. All right? To the evil that their hardened hearts would spread. And then the place where they built the tower to make a name for themselves was given the Hebrew name Babel, which translates to confusion. What they meant for evil, God turned for good. Now that should be our prayer today, that God would turn these evil movements for good. If we're faithful to appeal to God, who is perfectly just and faithful, He will respond. And that's it. We want to be merciful, full of grace. That is a just act that we can do. Go to exitthewho.com.
I just wanted to clarify, too, as well, that if you go to stoptheagenda.com, which is the web address that we've shown several times, it will take you to the same exact place.
Download that Armor of Truth mobile app. If you would, folks,
all right.
take a minute to like this video. We really need your help.
All right, so that's a little clip from our article for you.
Before things get real squirrely here.
Before things get squirrely, Summer. Do it before things get squirrely. So James Roguski has been right from the start. And I'll be, in all honesty, like, this is full disclosure here tonight. Year and a half, I didn't catch on to what James was actually saying. I listened to him closely. I couldn't quite get it. It just, as I just said, it just sort of washed over us in the past few weeks that, wait a minute, this is not about sovereignty. And of course it was. See, I'm the clown. In this story, I'm the clown because I am guilty of not reading the documents.
not in their entirety, not closely. Because when you do that, you come to know what's actually going on. Now, let's dive into what we wanted to start with here for you tonight. There's been some plot twists, as James has been reporting, coming up to this date. Again, the World Health Assembly is meeting right now. That's the governing body of the World Health Organization. And if they can come to some agreement on the international health regulations or this so-called pandemic treaty, they'll go ahead and vote for it now, which doesn't seem right. But you can see here is, oops, that's impossible to see, isn't it? There you go. Who member states agree way forward to conclude pandemic agreement. So this is from 2 days ago when they said they're going to keep on negotiating. It's, we're not, whatever that announcement was on Friday, it really didn't mean anything. Right. So here are the international health regulations. Now, what we're doing here is we're answering the question, is this about sovereignty? Is this about the sovereignty of the United States? That's the question. All right. This is the latest version of the international health regulations, right up until, what is this, May 20th, Summer? This would be the latest one.
Today's May 30th. That's the 27th.
Oh, this is the version, that's what I meant.
It's from the 27th.
From the 27th, okay. So this would be, it's not the latest because they're still negotiating these things. We don't get to see those. But as of 2023, the international health regulations explicitly acknowledges the sovereignty of member states in several instances. Now, I know what some of you are going to say before we even get started. Don't trust what they say. Okay, fair enough. Fair enough. You can take the approach you want, but we're going to read this document. We're going to read these points to you, what they say about sovereignty. And the same thing is echoed over in the draft pandemic accord convention treat thing as well. And then we're going to come back around. We're going to say this doesn't mean it's all good and okay. This is actually worse. Okay, and we'll tell you why. So it starts out here. This document emphasizes that the regulations, international health regulations, should be implemented in a manner that respects the rights and responsibilities of state parties, aka member nations. So here are some of the key references to sovereignty in the international health regulations. Article 3, principles. Article 3, principles. All right, we're in class now. Let's see, where am I? I'm in, this is the...
Page 10.
Thank you. Page I'm on. I got it. I'm in the annex. There we go. And here we go. That's Article 4. We're looking for Article 3. Goodness. There it is. Article 3, principles. It's just out of whack here. Okay. This article, Article 3 of the International Health Regulations, emphasizes that the sovereignty of states, of state parties...
That looks like a different document.
...should be...
That's DEI.
Oh, I'm in...
You're in a different...
I'm in the pandemic treaty, sorry.
Yeah.
Here we go. Goodness, man.
That's all right.
Here we go.
There's hundreds of documents.
Yeah, there's 50 some articles here in the IHR. Thank you for that. I was lost in the weeds. Want to be in the right document, right?
Document 9.
Talking about reading the documents and getting it all. Yeah. Well, how about being in the right document there, Bradley? How about that? Starting with Article 3. There you go. And what do the colors mean, Sam? Did you?
Green means that everybody's in agreement about it.
Okay. All right. And the highlights are what's been added. All right. Now, Article 3, Paragraph 1 here, the implementation of these regulations shall be with full respect for the dignity, human rights, and fundamental freedoms of persons. Now, the part that's added there, and shall promote equity and solidarity. Now, that's equity and solidarity. Those are vague terms. Human rights, dignity, fundamental freedoms are easily defined. Everybody understands what that means.
That just means neo-feudalism.
There you go. There you go.
And you have to, for the greater good, it's the collective, the solidarity.
Paragraph 2 in Article 3 just talks a little bit more about the implementation. As we move on down here to Article 4, let's see. States have, in accordance with the Charter, the Charter of the United Nations and the principles of international law, states have the sovereign right to legislate and implement legislation in pursuance of their health policies. Now, right there's the first clue. Obviously, the title of this show is, what is the title of this show? Wake up! This is not about sovereignty. And the point we keep making in our article is the who is not the greatest threat to your sovereignty. Who is? Well, as it says right here, this gives the game away right here. The international health regulations tell you who is out to take away your freedoms. Nations and the principles of international law, states have, in accordance with the Charter and the United Nations, Charter of the United Nations and the principles of international law, states have the sovereign right to legislate and implement legislation in pursuance of their health policies. And in doing so, they should uphold the purpose of these regulations. All right, so that's telling you right there who it actually is. That the question here is enforcement. Whatever these documents say, it comes down to who's going to enforce it. How is it going to be enforced? All right. As we look at Article 4, point 1 of Article 4, this is Article 4 is responsible authorities. So point 1, or paragraph 1 of Article 4, outlines the responsibility of states or nations to designate or establish authorities responsible for implementing the health measures under IHR. Again, states, nations, they have the responsibility of designating and establishing who the authority is responsible for implementing. That means putting them in, and it says here in a minute, even passing laws to make these things legally binding in your nation. See there, 1 bis, that means it's been inserted. The National IHR Authority, this is a person. This would be the person who would be in charge of making sure these things are implemented within the jurisdiction of the state party. Folks, you got to read the documents. Within the jurisdiction of the state party. All right. Nobody can enforce laws in the United States except the United States law enforcement agencies, the government. State party shall take measures to implement paragraphs 1 and 1. It goes on here to, once again, highlight the fact that nations will be the ones adjusting their domestic legislative and administrative arrangements. That means passing laws and doing what you have to do to make these things binding on your people. All right. Now, the new language here in Article 4 really has to do with the establishment of the IHR National Authority, as we've just looked at there. Point 2, or paragraph 2 here. This is about the focal point. This is about that person who would be assigned to make sure these things are implemented. All right, let's move on down here. Adjusting their domestic legislative and administrative arrangements. If you hear some background noise, folks, just bear with us. It's feels like it's 100 degrees in our studio tonight, so we had to open the window. So pardon us on that, if you would. If you don't, well, too bad, I guess. All right, let's move down here to Article 13 of the International Health Regulations. Speaks specifically about sovereignty. It has something to say about what everyone's been saying. Now, again, many of you out there are going to say, oh, so you're trusting the WHO. You're trusting this. Oh, no, I'm not trusting the WHO. I'm reading the document to you. And after we read the document, I'm going to present for you the argument as to why this is not the threat to your sovereignty. You should be catching on to it already about who is the threat. Here's Article 13. Article 13 is public health response. You can see what's added there, including equitable access to relatives, This is a very detailed article outlining the public health response in cooperation between states and the World Health Organization. Now, it stipulates that states should have or develop, strengthen and maintain the capacity to respond promptly and effectively to public health risks and emergencies and all that. The title, again, public health response, including equitable access. So, let's see, move down here too. These things are tedious, I know. So the language here, as you move on down, concerns the equitable sharing of the pandemic products and the intellectual property rights. So this one, Article, oh boy, what was it, 13? Yeah, Article 13 is a major sticking point for a lot of nations. The UK, United States are not happy with Article 13 because what this means is whatever you produce as a pandemic product, whether that's a jab or some kind of therapy or prophylactic, preventative or treatment, you have to share it with the WHO. You have to share 20%. If you make profit on it, you got to share 20% of that with the people. They're not. A lot of nations are not happy with that, so there's a problem there. Let's see, Article 43 goes on way down here in Article 43. Again, if you're upset with me for telling you this, just bear with us. Just bear with us for a minute. I think if you hang on through the end of this show, you're going to come away not just informed, you're going to come away inspired, fired up, ready to get to work. So Article 43, additional health measures. This article allows states to implement health measures in addition to those recommended by the WHO. So you can go beyond what the WHO. Likewise, it provides in here as well that nation or member states, they're called state parties in the IHR, can implement their own health policies. And as it stands here in the United States, I don't know how it is in Europe and other nations, but in the United States, the states have authority over what public health policies are implemented in the states locally. So there's that. There's that too. And there's also a problem with that, as we'll see. That's a good thing, and that's also a bad thing because it can be taken advantage of. What you see here is this article allows states to implement health measures in addition to those recommended by the WHO, provided they achieve the same or greater levels of health protection. There we go. The new language here in this article, the important part is in paragraph 7 regarding the process of resolving disputes between state parties through consultations and authorities. It's not that interesting other than, once again, it does affirm sovereignty of the nations. Again. So basically what we're trying to tell you here, we're going to move out of this because, man, is this stuff boring.
Let's also show that slide from the pandemic preparedness. I'm going to hit it.
Oh, okay, go ahead, yeah.
Yeah, there it is right there.
Go ahead, and I'll play this audio from the UK Parliament.
Okay.
Yeah, and we'll come back to that.
I'm profoundly sceptical of the World Health Organization's ability to manage a global pandemic in light of serious errors of judgment, poor leadership, and I'm afraid well-chronicled conflicts of interest, which have subsequently emerged. Of course, we can help poorer countries. Of course, we can collaborate with other nations, but under no circumstances must we surrender our sovereignty or sign up to a lockdown charter. And I hear what the Minister says about the text currently on the table and that it doesn't bind our hand, but he will know, many of us will know, that in the heat of an emergency, in the real time of a pandemic, there will be irresistible pressure that mounts on a government to make decisions which may well, and as we found, will turn out to be wholly harmful and wrong ones for the good of the country. That's why, Madam Deputy Speaker, will the Minister agree that fundamentally, and to coin a phrase, no pandemic treaty is better than a bad pandemic treaty?
All right, so you heard her say there, I think it's right here.
To a lockdown charter. And I hear what the Minister says about the text currently on the table and that it doesn't bind our hand, but he will know, many of us will know, that in the heat of an emergency, in the real time of a pandemic, there will be irresistible pressure that mounts on a government to make decisions which may well, and as we found, will turn out to be wholly harmful.
All right, so yeah, there you go. So she mentioned sovereignty there. Oh boy, here she is again. That's not. I had a different one. Let's go to Wide Awake Media. Oh, let's listen to this one too. This is from Croatia. One of the Croatian members of parliament.
The World Health Organization is demanding that all countries surrender authority to declare pandemics and procure so-called vaccines into their hands. Unfortunately, today there are very few of products that we can truly call vaccines. Most of them are pharmaceutical products without any proven effectiveness that can be classified as vaccine. When we look at the donors of World Health Organization, the Gavi Alliance, also known as Vax Alliance, the Gates Foundation, Sanofi, and others, if we hand over the power to declare pandemics and procure vaccine to the World Health Organization, we can expect a rapid change from the rhythm of any epidemics every 2 years to a rhythm of 1 epidemic per month. We can expect a shift from the von der Leyen's current 11 doses of vaccine per each EU citizens to a very likely 60 to 90 doses per each person in European Union. We can almost certainly expect obligatory vaccination or even of unborn children. From their perspective in the future of the world, I believe that is a great danger for world's population.
Okay, so he talks about there too, the threat to sovereignty and mandating, forcing people to take jabs. That the WHO would do that. The WHO would be able to force people to take jabs. The question we're asking, is that true?
And see how they use that as like the misinformation, disinformation. Because if you read the documents, it's actually not saying that they're going to be the ones enforcing it. And yet people have latched on to that. And then they get to point the finger and go, look, it's not even in the document in that way.
We are not saying that someone's not going to force you to do something.
Yeah, we're not saying that.
We're saying that it's not going to be the WHO that does it because they have no enforcement body, and nothing in these documents give them that power either. Let me just break it down just for a second here so that you guys, if you're confused about what in the world I could be talking about here. When it comes down to, let's just say, Tedros declares public health emergency of international concern, a PHEIC. Does the alternative media believe that the WHO is going to show up in your hometown to enforce lockdowns, mandates, and force you to take jabs? That's not the case. One of two things is going to happen whenever, if that ever happens. Your government, your state, or your national government is either going to ignore what they've said or they're going to enforce what they said. The threat to your sovereignty is not coming from the WHO. In fact, your sovereignty is not under threat at all. The important point to take home about all of this is that what this actually is, and I'm going to quote Roguski again here, the pandemic treaty and what it sets up is an exercise in sovereignty, right? Meaning that each nation will enforce this according to their own rules, they can adopt IHR points as specific laws. That's who it will be. Now let's see what I got here for you. So the text of both the draft let me get something. There's James. The text of both the draft Pandemic Framework Convention, or aka the treaty, and the proposed amendments to the IHR make it clear that these guidelines and regulations are to be implemented through the cooperation of each nation's own government, without undermining their authority and individual responsibilities to their citizens. Let's just think about it for a minute. What is the WHO? Is the World Health Organization an alien? Is it a group of aliens who came in here from another planet and set up somebody? I know, maybe they are. Somewhere, I don't know. Maybe they are aliens. But let's just assume that they're all human beings, flesh and blood, just like us. I know there might be some demonic things. That's true. Anyway,
David Icke would say reptilians.
Yes, right. That's true. You got to look at the eyes. I hear. Listen.
Just kidding.
Listen here, folks. What you need to understand is the World Health Organization is not some big autonomous body. The World Health Organization is us. Do you know how many Americans are on the delegation to the United Nations and, by extension there, to the World Health Organization? It's our own people there negotiating this. It's not somebody negotiating it for us and we don't get a say. The people we send there, our representatives, our delegates that Joe Biden sent there. You didn't send them. I didn't send them. But nevertheless, that's who the WHO is. We're all the WHO, and we'll describe a little bit more about that for you in a minute. So you've got to read the documents. The threat to your freedoms is not at the WHO. It is in your state house. It is in the White House if you're an American. The agencies that we have to be watchful for in America are the Department of Health and Human Services, the CDC, et cetera, et cetera. And I've got some important points to tell you tonight, and it'll have to do with the United Nations and Agenda 21. There's your model. If you know anything about Agenda 21 and the Sustainable Development Goals, Agenda 2030, it's all the same thing. They changed the name. Just like the WHO has changed the name of this thing several times, the United Nations has changed the name of that movement several times too. You know, kind of obfuscates things because people catch on and they have to shift, have to veer. Well, Agenda 21 is being implemented at the local level and has been for 30 years. And sometimes laws are passed, most of the time they're not. Now, our argument, you also hear, let's play the Meryl Nass clip here. Let's see, I've got a, well, goodness, I've lost my, I have lost my, I think I can probably find it. I lost my old slip of paper that had the, oh, here it is. It's a
the
bookmark.
timestamps.
Yeah, I got it right here. It's in the.
I've got Rosa Corey's book up on the screen.
Oh yeah, I've got it in my hand. I was going to show it. That's good. Leave it there. All right. So, yeah, let's leave that there for a minute because I'm gonna play for you Meryl Nass here making the argument about that. You know, you need to. She's saying that you need to tell your senator to support H.R. 1425. We're saying don't do that. All due respect to Meryl Nass and whoever else is in support of this, bad idea. This is a terrible idea.
You know, apparent changing of the guard of the WHO.
Oh, this is from globalresearch.ca that they're doing the interview with her, so let's give credit.
The way they operate, so they're not just an advisory body, they're a governing body, right?
They would be, the WHO would transition to be a governing body.
Wow.
All right.
Nature resistance has been registered already.
There's a claim. The World Health Organization would transition to become a governing body. Is that true? No, it's not true. Your government is the governing body who will enforce all of this stuff. Now, you've probably heard podcasters and bloggers or even health experts present one or more conflicting assessments of the threat and the various suggested responses. Some say the pandemic treaty directly threatens United States sovereignty. Others say that for the pandemic treaty to have any legal force, it must first be voted on by the United States Senate. Dr. Meryl Nass here and others have rightly assessed that the Senate does not have to vote on the pandemic accord, but then I'm not sure they understand because then and other times they say they do have to. Anyway, let's just go with what she says here. Senate doesn't have to vote on this because when they established the United States and several other allies from World War II started the United Nations, founded the United Nations and the WHO, it's their organization. So no, the Senate will not have to ratify anything that the WHO does because they ratified everything the WHO would do when they ratified the membership back in 1948. Okay, so a lot of folks are advocating support for House Resolution 1425, the No WHO Pandemic Preparedness Treaty Without Senate Approval Act. This bill would require a U.S. Senate vote on the pandemic treaty if it were to be ratified by the World Health Assembly or at any time. This was on March 7th of last year, 2023, when H.R. 1425 was introduced by Wisconsin Representative Tom Tiffany. He's a Republican. He introduced the bill to require Senate ratification of any, quote, pandemic treaty or agreements from the WHO. Now, Dr. Nass is a doctor. She's a board-certified internal medicine doctor. Since 1986, 41 years now. She's been attacked by both the medical industry and its regulating bodies in her own state, right? Threatening to have her license suspended. I think she did have it suspended. The media attacked her. And they did all this because she took the unpopular position that the jabs were experimental, dangerous substances. They weren't even vaccines, was her point. You know, we would agree with her on that. Most of her advice, most of her documentation, the flyers and stuff you find on her website, do a good job to raise awareness. They're very helpful. But promoting H.R. 1425, telling Americans that this bill will save us from the WHO and protect our sovereignty, that's a bad idea. So in a recent interview with Michael Welch here on globalresearch.ca, Dr. Nass was asked to explain the pandemic accord's global impact. She said, quote, you just heard the WHO would transition to a governing body. And then when asked to tell listeners what they can do, what can be done to fight back, she said this.
In the United States, for example, could you talk about some of the victories that have already come forward, or partial victories, in response to this WHO order?
Yes. So we've had amazing victories in the U.S. So first off, 49 senators, every Republican senator has sent a letter to the president and co-sponsored a bill demanding that these treaties be put before the Senate for ratification. Now, most people think all treaties go before the Senate for ratification because that's what the Constitution says. But in fact, for 200 years, most of them have not.
That's a claim there, too.
By the executive branch. So this would demand that it go before the Senate. And if we can get...
That's a claim that all the treaties for the last 200 years have not been voted on by the Senate. The Paris Agreement is a treaty. Right, that's the climate change agreement with the United Nations. That's a treaty. It was ratified by the Senate. So again, with all due respect to Dr. Nass, there's so much good that she's accomplished, but there are some severe problems here. Now let's continue because she makes these more significant claims.
Done. So the Biden administration doesn't want it to go before the Senate, and it will require a law making it go in front. And we've got 49 senators in favor. We've got 50 some odd House members who have co-sponsored a bill doing the same thing. We need to get 2 additional senators who are not Republicans, and then we can pass this law, and then we can kill these treaties, at least for the United States, at the level of the Senate. We've also had 22 attorneys general send a letter to the president saying that actually, according to the Constitution, the states have authority for health, not the president. And they do not agree with transferring that authority to the WHO, and they do not plan to carry out either direct or indirect orders from the WHO on health.
Now that's something, because you don't have to have any votes or do anything for that. States can do that. Not required. There's no need to do HR 1425, which is going to cause more harm than good. Here comes the last statement. That's about sovereignty.
That was just a few weeks ago?
That was on May 8th. So 2 weeks ago, tomorrow. And the senator's letter was on May 1st. Okay. We also have several states that have passed legislation that will protect.
And we've got all this in the article.
Utah passed legislation.
The states, what happened in Oklahoma, Louisiana, we've explained that.
Passed legislation in the Senate, and it's passed in the House, and there was a slight change to bring the date it becomes active on to the date of signing by the governor, and it went to the governor yesterday. So and the governor is in favor. So we're expecting that Louisiana will have this law in place, sometime this week.
Now, that law in Louisiana and the one in Oklahoma basically said that the WHO and the UN and the World Economic Forum have no jurisdiction here in our state. And that's all well and good, but we're going to explain to you in just a moment why that doesn't matter one little bit. When it comes to implementing or legalizing this stuff at the local level, we'll tell you exactly how it's going to be implemented. Whether it doesn't matter what declarations of sovereignty or who has jurisdiction or doesn't have in your area. They know how to get around it. Again, the United Nations, Agenda 21, Sustainable Development Goals for 30 years, more than 30 years now, have been doing it right under your noses in your own backyard, and you didn't even know it.
And there are several other states that have passed resolutions or are in the process of passing bills. There was an assassination attempt on his life, and he's
talking about the Iranian president here.
Even though I asked them previously to publicly state what they would do ahead of time to give up one company, but I would say, don't go out on a limb right now and say how your nation is going to vote. Instead, demand a roll call vote. And so that diplomat and that country can be held accountable for their vote.
That's a good point there. I think when we find out who our delegates, find out, what's her name, Pamela Hamamoto is our delegate to the WHO, who's on the international negotiating body on the INB, and find out who these people are that are our delegates to the WHO, to the United Nations, and let them have it. They're servants of the people. You've got to get engaged with this. Find out who it is that's voting for this stuff, who's not willing to stand up or is not willing to exit the WHO or pull out of it, the United Nations as well. Find out and tell them you're not going to vote for anybody who thinks we should be hitched to the WHO. She goes on here to say it's absolutely necessary when we're talking about transferring sovereignty. I want to hear her say that. So let me just keep going. It comes
right up. This is something the WHO does not like to do, but it's absolutely necessary when we're talking about transferring sovereignty, transferring governance to this unaccountable international organization. People who vote yes need to be accountable.
She said it's absolutely necessary. When we're talking about transferring sovereignty, transferring governance to this unaccountable international organization, that statement's false. That doesn't happen. The authority stays with our government. They'll decide to enforce it or not. If it's Joe Biden in there, they'll enforce it. If it's Donald Trump in there, maybe not. Here's the problem. This letter she's talking about, with 49 senators sent to Joe Biden regarding have you read this letter? She told you about the letter. Have you read this letter? Got it here somewhere. It's from the Sovereignty Coalition. Goodness, there's the clown again. How about that? Is that good? Anyway, I'll move on for you here. Anyway, have you read the letter? Again, are you reading the documents? In the letter, these senators stated, and there's 22 attorneys general as well, but in this letter to President Biden, they said they wanted President Biden to shift his attention to reform the World Health Organization. Summer, what's the problem with that? Reforming.
It
right?
It gives the Senate the opportunity to really give it teeth.
Well, it's not good enough, right? I mean, reforming the WHO. We've
Right.
got this thing where I can't see you anymore. We got to fix
Right.
that.
So we don't want to reform it. We don't want to ratify it. What we need to do is exit. We need to leave.
Exactly. That's the point. So that's all the letter that these senators and attorneys general sent to Joe Biden. That's all they're asking for is we've got to fix the WHO. Reforming the WHO is not a solution, as Summer has said and has added in our article here. At best, when you reform the WHO, at best it accomplishes nothing. At worst, and more likely, it results in an even worse situation with an even more well-funded WHO with even more authority, perhaps. Right? And also, these 22 state attorneys general who sent the letter to President Biden stating that the WHO is in need of reform. Wrong. Reform is not good enough. The WHO cannot be reformed because the WHO is fundamentally corrupt. The WHO must be abolished. Period. Now, additionally, Dr. Nass claims that the treaties need to be ratified. You heard her say that there. Even if the United States signs up to them, we can still have the Senate ratify. There's no need to sign up to anything. It's really critical. She said, important for our freedoms going forward. Beg your representatives to co-sponsor Bill 1425, Tom Tiffany's bill to require Senate ratification. She said, if we can get this in front of the Senate for ratification, it dies, or the pandemic treaty dies. And that's just not true. And she claims that then we're saved. The United States would be saved from the WHO if we can pass this bill. In our article, we've got a link to the full text of H.R. 1425. Also, H.R. 79, the bill to withdraw and defund the WHO. That's the one. Now, Dr. Nass is a very popular and respected voice in this fight. She can influence many people, and I would give anything to be able to chat with her about this because correct me where I'm wrong. Tell me how I've got this wrong. I'm willing to listen. We're happy to receive a rebuke. We don't want to keep going on in error. Correct us if we're wrong. I don't want to be wrong. And we appreciate anybody who's willing to risk their career, stand up publicly against globalist organizations that would do us harm. Right? That's a brave act. But there are some severe problems here with what's being suggested. We always have to test these important truth claims, wherever they come from. Now, we strongly suggest that if the threat assessment is incomplete, then the response to the threat is going to be insufficient and could do more harm than good. So our questions are, we've already asked a couple of them. Is Dr. Nass's threat assessment regarding the nature of this relationship between the U.S. and the WHO, is it accurate? And secondly, is Bill 1425 in our best interest? Now, we understand lots of times that bills like this are sometimes introduced as a way of gauging support. How many people are actually willing to vote for something like this? How many people are actually thinking about this? It's sometimes bills like this are introduced just to demonstrate a swell of support among the people, or to generate support for an idea or some change that's desired. But if the goal is to protect sovereignty, if what you intend to do, if what you want to do is ensure the sovereignty of the United States, H.R. 1425 could very likely have the opposite effect. Now, we're not just saying it won't do anything. We're saying it could do the opposite. A bill that's intended to protect our sovereignty could, in fact, harm it. Right? By opening the door, as Summer said a minute ago, it would give it teeth. It would finally have some legal standing. It would do the opposite effect by opening the door to a potential dilution of our sovereignty. How? I'll explain it. I'll explain it soon, coming right up. Rather than clarifying our sovereignty, if Bill 1425 was passed, it would confuse and fundamentally alter the nature of both the pandemic agreement and the United States relationship with the WHO. That would effectively undermine U.S. sovereignty by removing the intended flexibility and voluntary nature of our membership with the WHO. Right? What if that happened and, they're assuming, right? They're assuming that this bill, they've got 49 senators. They're convinced that it's automatic. They're going to, if we can get this thing to a vote, they're going to vote for it. Well, why would you assume that? Requiring Senate ratification for the WHO's pandemic accord, again, would fundamentally alter its legal scope and its impact and set up a far worse problem. It would cause confusion about legal status and obligations of agreements like this. It would inadvertently commit the United States to mechanisms that are typically reserved for legally binding treaties. It would add a major bureaucratic burden to the process of international cooperation, and it could slow down the implementation of otherwise beneficial initiatives. All right, we don't want this. It could, and again, for future agreements, this could establish a precedent or an expectation for all future agreements with the WHO or the United Nations or any other specialized agency or any other international organization that could badly complicate American or United States foreign policy and our international collaboration. It could transform the policies of the World Health Organization or the UN into de facto legally binding agreements, right? So right now it's a non-binding agreement. We'll define that for you.
This
in
is
the
where,
article we define it.
This is where we really thought this is scary because it's actually been speculated with good reason from Roguski that they actually would want it to fail so that they could come back and do something even more of what they want to accomplish. Something that's a lot worse, that's a lot more sinister. And I think this is one of the mechanisms to get to that point. Yeah. After having looked into all this. So
this is how it could affect, it could potentially undermine national sovereignty.
Right.
It could undermine legislative autonomy, our ability to make our own laws even. This is because Senate ratification is typically the process reserved for binding treaties, legally binding treaties. The Pandemic Accord is not a legal treaty. It is a non-binding agreement. Now let's just throw up a disclaimer and a caveat right here. Non-binding agreement does not mean that it's harmless. In fact, in many ways, as Summer just said, a non-binding agreement, in a lot of ways, gives far more latitude for infiltrating the lives of citizens than binding agreements do. Or what Summer just said was if it was legalized, it would have teeth. And then you've got...
Yeah, it's like they're bringing it truly into the system versus it being on the peripheral.
Yeah, you would set up a situation where we would have to enforce it. But have any choice. For example, the policies of Agenda 21, as we've just talked about, 2030, the Sustainable Development Goals, they're non-binding agreements. They've been easily implemented in the United States at the local level for over 30 years. The WHO is a specialized agency of the UN. Their goals are one and the same. The pharmaceutical and medical industries are among the largest lobbies in Washington, D.C. Dr. Nass and her compatriots here assume that a vote on ratification of the Pandemic Accord would go in their favor. And they see that now because they've got all these senators, they've got all these senators in favor. It's a shoo-in, right? It's easy. It's not a guarantee. There's more than a good chance that most, if not all, of those 49 senators supporting H.R. 1425 right now, it's a good chance that they are to some degree funded by the pharmaceutical and medical industry. A lot, congressmen and senators are. It costs these senators, or if you're talking about congressmen, them too, it costs them nothing to support a bill when it's just a resolution, when it's introduced. It doesn't cost them anything to support it then. But when the time comes to vote on it, you can guarantee that influence from activists, the media, non-governmental organizations, and pharmaceutical and medical industry lobbies will put the pressure on. And they can be very persuasive. They can be coercive. And so these senators are not likely to be willing to end their careers in Washington by cutting their own funding by maybe 10, 20, or 30%, or maybe more. And that's precisely what would happen if they offend their largest donors.
Well, we know that they've used, one of their main strategies is the gamification of all of these things, and they wanted to provide a environment where people felt incentivized. And so, when you're very, very wealthy, you can basically bribe people and entice people into return on investment for every dollar spent. And we've gone into that with several times about the 35-to-1 on investment.
Yeah.
And we also have documentation from 2022 that member states contribute directly nearly 60% of the program budget. And another 14% comes from other organizations in the United Nations system, partnerships and development banks, which they themselves largely funded by governments. And nearly 10% of the WHO's funds come from philanthropic foundations, predominantly the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So we know that, looking at their documents, this comes directly from the WHO, that they have incentive, right? And so if everybody's incentivized and their future prospects of business, this is the bottom dollar that they're, it's a no-brainer, and it's very toxic. So it's a situation where greed in this case is selling us out.
Yeah, well said. Yeah, that's a good point. Let's assume this. Even if H.R. 1425 was passed, it would most likely be transformed by additions and compromises. It's going to go through 2 or 3 periods of due diligence or debate and compromises. It could be turned into some unrecognizable law that could potentially end up, again, giving the WHO the legal authority it didn't have before. It's a bad idea. But that's politics in Washington, D.C., right? That Big Pharma is a major player, maybe the biggest player in Washington as far as money goes. That's the reality. Here's another quote for you. George Washington, in his farewell address, September 19th, 1796, said, quote, "Guard against the impostures of pretended patriotism." Right? People who think they're doing a good thing. It gets worse. If such a bill were ratified, that would mean it would be legalized. That would cause the court systems in our nation, to view all of these guidelines or suggestions in the pandemic agreement. The court system would have to view it differently. They would have to view it with more legal authority, as they do fully binding legal treaties. That could potentially subject American citizens to unforeseen international norms that go beyond U.S. law and that are actually enforceable by international courts. They have no jurisdiction over citizens right now. If you bring that thing in and let's all vote on it, you're running the risk of having that happen. Guidelines could quickly become international legal disputes and obligations that the U.S. had no intention of undertaking. Could also exacerbate political divisions, could lead to greater domestic, international tensions, could harm the foreign policy of the United States. Perhaps one of the worst consequences for this bill, for requiring Senate ratification of WHO policies, that would be the complication of the withdrawal process. This would be the worst thing about H.R. 1425. As it stands now, as we played for you a minute ago, withdrawing from the WHO is a fairly straightforward process. You notify them in writing. And after a 1-year waiting period, you're out. In 2020, Donald Trump did just this. May 29th, he announced it on, I think it was June 30th. What's his name? Forgot his name. Secretary of State at the time.
Blinken.
No, it's not Blinken. It was it's the big guy, the former CIA. Gosh, I can't remember his name. It doesn't matter. Anyway, he sent the letter to the WHO, formally announcing the withdrawal, and so that means 1 year after that it would have been effective. So that's June 30th of 2020. Get back around to January the 21st, or In that first week Joe Biden was in office, one of the first things he did was to retract that letter, to retract our withdrawal from the WHO. So you see what's at stake here, right? One president, if something like this happened and you could bring it up to the Senate for ratification, you effectively legalize it and you turn it into something that has that can actually be legally enforced here.
Yeah, so I would say that this is sort of a ploy to get everybody to, not just in America, but nations around the world. They want to get the people clamoring for, hey, yeah, let's get our officials to vote on this. And then that opens the doorway for like super nefarious things, actually.
It would make withdrawing from the WHO virtually impossible.
Yeah.
It would make it very hard. So, several bills, as we talked about, were introduced at the state and federal levels, aiming to protect America's sovereignty from potential WHO mandates. But there is only one bill that addresses the WHO problem appropriately, and we've talked about it here on January 9th, 2023. Congressman Andy Biggs from the 5th District in Arizona submitted House Resolution 79, the WHO Withdrawal Act. So if the WHO were a disease, this bill would address the root cause. This bill would address the cure rather than masking the symptoms like so many other bills. This proposed legislation, H.R. 79, is very simple. It would stop all United States funding of the World Health Organization. It would repeal the act of June 14th, 1948 that got us in to the WHO. And number 3, it would begin the 1-year process to enable the United States to exit the WHO. Now that is right. That's what we need. We got to end that whole organization. There's not much good coming out of it right now. In fact, we could do a lot better, right? In our own nations, we could do a lot better. Right, Joe Biden already, Summer, didn't you tell me he had committed the United States to billions of dollars to go ahead to whenever there's a public health emergency to take care of developing nations or something like that?
Yeah. Well, and also we can't forget that the White House launched the Pandemic Preparedness and Response Policy.
Oh yeah, the Office of
Permanent Office, yeah.
Office of Pandemic Preparedness and Response with Major
Friedrichs.
Yeah, Major General Paul Friedrichs.
Mm-hmm.
That was back in August of last year.
Yes.
And, we have our own pandemic preparedness thing. So.
Right. So it's like you can see like they've already got the office ready and they've got people like in position that are just sort of waiting in the wings. And then once they can get this thing formalized by putting it on the Senate floor, boom.
That's right. Folks, what causes tyranny to embed itself and to begin to spread like rust on an old ship is when citizens who become fat, happy, lazy, incurious, uninterested barnacles do nothing or don't pay attention or don't read the documents. You're the government until you're not. All right, so don't let that happen. Now, let's go ahead and talk about Summer. Let's give the folks the hypothetical worst case scenario. If we're talking about sovereignty, the hypothetical worst case scenario, how could, let's just say, an international organization like the WHO or the United Nations, how could they subvert United States sovereignty? Well, could an international organization with support from local actors and government representatives inside the United States, could they conspire to create an agreement that was advertised as public safety policy, but was actually designed to subvert the sovereignty of the United States? Well, they could draft an agreement, like they're doing. A detailed agreement crafted under the guise of addressing public health, security, or environmental concerns, sustainable development goals. The agreement could include provisions that grant significant authority to an international body, like the WHO, potentially overriding national laws and policies. Let's just follow it through. This agreement is negotiated and adopted by the UN or the WHO or whoever, and it has significant support from member states, like it does now. If you didn't realize, the United States has been nothing but supportive of the pandemic accord, framework, whatever, agreement since it began, since the negotiations began. We've never wavered. And that's because this particular regime that's in office or is occupying the White House right now are all about it. They're, bought and paid for by the pharmaceutical industry. Just be very clear. Your enemy is not the WHO. Your enemy is your own government. But even worse than that, your enemy is those who own your government. And right now, who owns our government? It is the pharmaceutical and medical industry. They have the money. They have the power. So let's assume this agreement is negotiated. And who do you think is making up this pandemic treaty? Who do you think is putting all these points in there and coming up with these ideas to benefit financially from pandemic products? Yeah, it's them. It's the same people. So they negotiate the agreement. Let's say member states love it. Agreement is presented as essential for global safety. And because of that, out of this sense of fear, it gets widespread international support. Now, let's say high-level U.S. officials, possibly influenced or compromised by the conspirators, let's say these high-level officials in the U.S. advocate for the agreement. They present it as crucial for addressing an urgent global issue, as they have. For the agreement to become binding in the United States, it must be ratified by the United States Senate with a 2/3 majority. Given the political and public pressure, along with the lobbying efforts from various stakeholders, let's just say that H.R. 1425 was passed and the agreement was ratified by the Senate. Following ratification, implementing legislation is introduced to Congress. Now, because Congress is where laws are actually created. Conjured into existence through language, right? Well, let's say that this legislation is introduced in Congress to align with U.S. laws and the provisions of the international agreement. So it comes into alignment, and the legislation is passed, and then this agreement, let's call it a pandemic agreement, was integrated into domestic law. This agreement establishes a centralized global authority with the power to enforce policies with member states, and the authority could override national decisions in critical areas such as public health, security, and environmental regulation. What about enforcement? Well, these specific mandates are issued by the international body, requiring compliance from member states, and in the U.S., federal and state agencies are legally bound. Let me say that again. If the Senate was to ratify something like this, in the U.S., federal and state agencies would be legally bound to implement and enforce these mandates at that point. Not the way it stands now, but if we tried to do something like that. International agents or representatives are stationed inside the United States to oversee the implementation of policies. They tell the CDC and the DHHS or maybe the FBI or maybe the National Guard or maybe your local police department, they tell them how to enforce it. And because now it's the law of the land, they have to do it. Well, this is how sovereignty could actually be eroded. The international agreement might include provisions that limit the ability of the Congress or the state legislators to make any amendments on this new legislation. Maybe they couldn't reject specific policies. This effectively diminishes legislative oversight. So you don't want to take any kind of agreement from some international organization and try to and put it in a position where it could become law. Because I'm telling you, whatever these 49 senators have said about, ratification, or the idea would be that they would all vote against it. That's the assumption. Nothing is ever guaranteed when it comes down to a Senate vote. Of course, policies might be enacted to suppress dissent, to suppress opposition to that agreement, curtailing freedoms of speech and assembly under the pretext of maintaining public order. This international body could use economic and political leverage, like sanctions, diplomatic pressure, to ensure compliance and to suppress opposition. Worst case consequences. The United States gradually loses its ability to make independent policy decisions, effectively becoming subordinate to the international authority. Key aspects of our government, like public health, security, and environmental policies, would then be, the door would be open to them being controlled by this international body. And of course, what would follow very quickly after that, widespread public distrust. Civil unrest might ensue as citizens realize the extent of this subversion. And this could lead to significant political instability, challenges to the legitimacy of the United States government even. Now, this is a hypothetical scenario, and it outlines a worst-case situation. But it's important to note that such a plot is possible. It probably would face a lot of legal, political, and practical obstacles, but this is a potential outcome if we decide we want to try to, bring this thing to Senate for a vote. And, oh no, they didn't vote against it, they voted for it because the pharmaceutical industry put $10 million in their pocket or whatever. The Constitution provides significant checks and balances, including the requirement for Senate ratification of treaties, provides for legislative oversight, judicial review, and the decentralized nature of governance with strong state powers. Public awareness, your engagement, a strong media, which we don't have today. Most important is public awareness and an active civil society to serve as the crucial defenses against any kind of subversive attempt like this. This little exercise, this little thought experiment, underscores the importance of vigilance, transparency, and the democratic process in safeguarding our national sovereignty. Now, what does all this mean? Let's talk for a minute about the relationship between the United States and the WHO. What's the nature of this relationship? So, once again, the WHO was established as a specialized agency of the United Nations with its own constitution, which came into force on April 7th, 1948. Pay close attention to this, folks. This is where it gets very interesting. This is where you're going to learn the truth about the United States and the WHO and this relationship. The United States was one of the original member states that signed the WHO Constitution, and the U.S. has been a significant contributor financially and in terms of policy influence all along. So the United States is a key player in the World Health Organization. The U.S. provides, again, substantial funding, specific expertise in guiding these initiatives at the WHO. U.S. membership in the WHO also aligns with the United States' broader foreign policy objectives. Why would the United States damage their foreign policy relationship? Well, let's say, here's another point. The United States is one of the original signatories of the WHO Constitution, signing it in 1946. Again, it was ratified in 1948 under President Harry Truman. All right, so President Truman is the one who got us into this mess. Now, we need somebody to come along and withdraw us from it. As a member of the World Health Organization, the United States has legal and financial obligations, mainly cooperative, as the WHO is basically an advisory body rather than coercive. In fact, really, the only mechanism for enforcement that the WHO has, or the UN really has, for that matter, is public shaming. Right? I think you said sanctions too, Summer. Right? You said
funding,
sanctions. Yeah, these are. But there's no actual legal enforcement. The United States, let's talk about a little bit about the money, the contributions, the financial contributions. The U.S. gives something called assessed contributions. That's what member states are required to give to the WHO, and it's based on your the income of your nation, how wealthy you are. And then there are voluntary contributions, and Joe Biden has been very happy to keep giving more and more money to the WHO during the whole time he's been in office. So the U.S. makes significant voluntary contributions to support the WHO, and what's the old saying? The one who pays the piper calls the tune. What I'm trying to tell you here is that the WHO really is just an agency of the United States and the UK. Yeah, I think of the allies, the founders, it was the United States, the UK, the USSR, China was also all part of that.
Germany and Norway.
There you go. Thank you. Now, here's where it gets good. The World Health Assembly, which is meeting right now, is the governing and decision-making body of the WHO. Now, the U.S., what's called the U.S. mission to the United Nations, is a large delegation headed by the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, and it includes a team of diplomats and experts and support staff who are assigned to multiple committees, councils, assemblies, and specialized agencies, including the WHO. So we're well represented at the UN and the WHO. The U.S. delegation to the WHO generally includes officials from federal agencies like the Department of Health and Human Services, the Centers for Disease Control, various other public health agencies and experts. What do? Well, these delegates participate in the World Health Assembly. Who is it that's voting on the pandemic treaty this week? It's our delegates. It's citizens of the United States. They're part of it. Our delegates also participate on the WHO Executive Board. What this means, what I'm trying to tell you here is the United States is directly involved in guiding and implementing World Health Organization policies, and the United States is directly involved in governing the WHO. Now, as we've already pointed out, what kind of guidelines the WHO puts out? Well, guidelines, recommendations, and advisories. You've got the international health regulations. When you read about them, it says they're binding, right? But they're binding in name only. They are non-binding in nature. That's because international health regulations, they're legally binding in the sense that member states, including the U.S., are obligated to report public health events and collaborate in the event of international health emergencies. However, and this is where the rubber hits the road, Summer and I, we've been talking about this all day, and this is the point we keep coming back to over and over. The enforcement of international health regulations relies on the national government's voluntary compliance. In this case, in the United States, enforcement of the IHR or pandemic agreement, whatever it is, relies on our government.
And we already saw it in 2020.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's what we saw in some states. They enforced the WHO regulations or the CDC guidelines. In some states, they didn't. Let's keep it that way. Let's don't legalize this thing. Now, the United States implements these regulations, these guidelines, through domestic laws and regulations that are overseen, once again, by agencies like Health and Human Services and the CDC. Again, the WHO's role in the United States is advisory. The United States government assesses the advice or the recommendations from the WHO, and then the U.S. government decides how to incorporate them into domestic policy or not to do it at all. Implementing the guidelines of the World Health Organization and recommendations, or the whatever, we'll just call it the pandemic treaty for now. Implementing that, let's not call it a treaty because that's confusing. Let's just call it the agreement. Implementing the WHO pandemic agreement within the United States is a sovereign decision of the United States. It's a sovereign decision inside the UK or in Canada. Are you hearing? Is it making any sense to you? It's a sovereign decision. So people are saying to us, this is a threat to our sovereignty. No, the pandemic agreement and our government's interaction with the WHO is an exercise in sovereignty. I'll keep going. It'll make more sense. Let's talk about jurisdiction. At the federal level, agencies like the CDC and HHS, they're the ones who interpret and implement these WHO guidelines or pandemic agreement. At the state level, and here's a very important point, individual states have significant authority over policies on local public health matters, also on things like education. So states can decide, this, again, like Summer said, this is what we saw in 2020. So your government, your state government, your federal government can decide whether or not to apply or enforce or do anything at all with these WHO recommendations, unless you go in and have somebody vote on it and it becomes a law, and that's not good. Any binding international agreements influenced by the World Health Organization recommendations would generally require legislative oversight and approval by Congress. They don't want that. I'll explain exactly why they don't want that in just a moment. So let's talk about this theoretical package of amendments, right? This pandemic treaty. If a new group of officials at the WHO and the UN were to establish this agreement, including amendments to the international health regulations, this pandemic agreement, to require member states to enforce these as mandates, this would represent a significant shift from the WHO's advisory role to a more authoritative stance. We're not saying the WHO doesn't have any influence. They have massive influence. But they only have massive influence because these governments are the WHO. People are the WHO. The WHO is not a monolithic robot. It's just people. It's us. These amendments might give, or the IHR, the International Health Regulations, as they stand right now, do give Tedros, the WHO's Director General, give him the authority to declare a global public health emergency. And they give him the authority to advise that these be enforced at the national level. The United States Constitution, Article 2, Section 2, says for any international agreement, such as amended international health regulations, to have legal standing in the U.S., but pay attention, to have legal standing in the U.S. would typically need to be ratified by the Senate. You see that? Now let's turn that around. If the Senate ratified them, then they would have legal standing. We don't want that. Executive agreements. In the article, we have a big section in there on executive agreements and what that means. In this case, it means the president might just decide to enter into some legally binding agreement with an international body, which does not require Senate ratification, but must still comply with existing laws in the Constitution in that sense. But in this case, the United States maintains its sovereignty, but engages in international treaties and agreements to address certain challenges in the world. This is how we normally do business, right? This is how we operate in the world. We make treaties and we engage in these agreements with people and maintain our sovereignty. The Constitution stipulates that when treaties are signed, when treaties are ratified in the United States, they become, quote, the supreme law of the land, unquote. That's what the Constitution says. Do you think it's a good idea to risk in any way having these things voted on by the Senate? I think that's a bad idea. If they were, ratified by our Senate. Just like international treaties, then they would have to go on to be passed by Congress so they could be enforceable domestically. Now, it's not an easy process. It's not even likely that it would make it through all that, but it's a possible outcome. It's something you don't want to risk. Now, of course, as mentioned several times already, federalism, the idea of states' rights in the United States, this means that the states really have authority over what they're going to do. And we saw this in Oklahoma, where Dusty Devers was leading this movement on their Senate bill 426, I think it was. Wow, I remember that. And basically they were saying the UN, the WHO, and the World Economic Forum, to name 3 international organizations, have no jurisdiction here. You know, and so you applaud that because you see what they're doing. They have the authority to decide what kind of relationship they're going to have with the WHO. So they understand the Constitution. My problem with their declarations of sovereignty is that they focused on the wrong entity. You don't need to be declaring your sovereignty to the WHO. You need to be declaring it to the United States federal government. You need to be telling them, if you get into some agreement, if you sign and legalize some agreement with the WHO, we're not having it. We're not taking part in it. We're telling you right now, we've passed a law. So that's what they should have done. They didn't do that. So you got to wonder, do they understand what's really at stake? If international mandates conflict with U.S. constitutional principles, particularly regarding states' rights and individual liberties, there would be significant legal and political challenges. State governments, civil liberties organizations, the judiciary could oppose such mandates. Well, what if they didn't? And then for highly restrictive international health regulations or WHO policies that would be implemented locally in American states and cities without extensive legislative oversight, several conditions would have to be met first. Now, we're talking about legally. I'm going to tell you in a minute how it's going to happen anyway. Let's talk about the non-binding agreement. In this context, a non-binding agreement, which is what the pandemic treaty is, again, the IHR is binding but non-binding in nature because there's no enforcement. A non-binding agreement refers to agreements that are often used to express a commitment to cooperate on shared goals. Remember that term, shared goals and policies, without imposing legal obligations. That's the nature of a non-binding agreement. Again, I said earlier, that doesn't mean a non-binding agreement is a good thing. They're dangerous too. But we definitely don't want to legalize it. Unlike treaties or binding agreements, non-binding agreements do not create legal rights or obligations that can be enforced through legal mechanisms. Member states are not legally required to implement the terms of the agreement. So these agreements are, in fact, voluntary commitments of the parties involved. Instead of enforcement, they rely on the good faith, political will of the member states to honor their terms. That is the nature of the pandemic agreement. Non-binding agreements are also flexible. They can be adapted and modified in many ways. They can be ignored. They can be honored, ignored, implemented, or changed, or not. But the primary means of enforcement of such an agreement is significant diplomatic and political consequences, right? It's not legal consequences. It would certainly be more severe for a small or developing nation, but for the United States, the incentive to collaborate on shared goals is almost certainly mostly to gain advantages in foreign policy or to exert influence around the world. Non-binding agreements, some examples are like memorandums of understanding, MOUs, declarations, resolutions, guidelines, and frameworks. Now, the United Nations and the WHO. The United Nations utilizes non-binding resolutions and declarations to promote international cooperation on things like human rights, environmental protection, climate change, and now, of course, gender inclusivity for some reason. Also, the WHO. Non-binding agreements are standard for the WHO as well. Now, as we've already demonstrated, the international health regulations serve as a framework, often referred to as binding. However, enforcement relies entirely on the voluntary cooperation of your country. Pandemic Accord, or as some are calling it, a treaty, is defined as a non-binding agreement which is flexible, making guidelines within it easy to implement outside the legal system. You see. And almost certainly at the local level through the influence of lobbyists, activists, NGOs, corporations, etc. Now, as a member state, the United States mainly engages in non-binding agreements with these international organizations for its own purposes, not for the purposes of the people typically. Right? Agenda 21 does not serve the people. And these agreements do not require Senate ratification, which we've said several times now. So whether it's Agenda 21 Sustainable Development Goals, whether it's the Pandemic Preparedness Agreement, these rules or agreements ostensibly reflect the world, the people of the world's, what they want. That's what they tell you, right? Everybody's in favor of this because we need it. We got to have it, and everyone's in support. In reality, we've seen with the United Nations for over 30 years, with smart growth and sustainable development, we've seen that the majority of the people do not appreciate these egregious policies. Once they realize what it meant, what really happened, once they don't have access to their lake anymore or the forest in their area. These policies are imposed on people locally through the perception of consensus. Now, what we're talking about now is the other case. Let's say that the pandemic agreement doesn't get ratified at the World Health Assembly. But these policies still exist. And the pharmaceutical industry intends to implement them at the local level. These policies would be imposed on people locally through the perception of consensus. More accurately, the manufacturing of consent through local regional advocacy groups. Now, when you understand how this process has worked for over 30 years in America already, and how the same process worked in communist states to shut down dissent through propaganda and public shaming, then you begin to see the true nature of the WHO's Pandemic Accord. It's just the same as the nature of Agenda 21 and Sustainable Development Goals. The collective agreement of the international community is manufactured. It's conjured out of nothing, kind of like they make money. It's done in precisely the same way, albeit on a much larger scale. It's the new progressive form of political, social discourse. And you are selfish. You're problematic if you disagree with their plans. You might feel so shamed and stressed out by all the threats of losing your friends or losing your job that you eventually decide to go along to get along. It's just too hard to fight back against this. It's too inconvenient to miss out on the social engagements. It's too uncomfortable to be isolated from society. Are you beginning to see how these things would be implemented at the local level anyway? There's no need for laws when you can manufacture mass perception through social engineering. And there's no need for statutes when you can impose moral obligations on people. That is the way of the New World Order, soft or therapeutic totalitarianism. It's for the good of the community. It's to protect the less fortunate. You must bow the knee to the fear and shame, or the fear of shame. The fear of shame and the fear of austerity And you stay off the land. You're not allowed to go there because we have to protect the rights of people in the future. Even if they're not legally enforceable at the federal level, non-binding agreements between international organizations and member states can significantly influence the shaping of local policies. How? How has it happened that Agenda 21 has been implemented everywhere? Anywhere you see a mixed-use facility, you know, where there's a restaurant on the bottom and apartments or condos up top, that's it. That's sustainable development. That's a policy of the United Nations. Well, here's how it works. This is how the WHO's policies could be implemented just the same. And I'll tell you what they look like. I'm going to tell you in a minute exactly what the WHO's pandemic agreement policies look like in your hometown right now. They're already there. So when these so-called shared goals, so these non-binding agreements, when they're promoted or coerced at the state and local level through various interested parties, also known as stakeholders, that's people who stand to benefit in some way. They promote the policies of the United Nations, of the WHO, or the World Economic Forum. And that's how these organizations can very easily get their policies implemented at the local level, because nobody knows it was those that they don't know that those policies came from those groups. You see what I'm saying? If Oklahoma decides that the UN and the WHO and the WEF have no jurisdiction here, it doesn't matter, right? You thought it was a local environmental advocacy group. You thought it was the charity across town. You thought it was the construction company building all those mixed-use walkable communities, department store, movie theater on the bottom, apartments up top. You know, the place where there's no parking because they don't allow cars, but they have enough bike lanes to host the Tour de France. That's what Agenda 21 looks like in your hometown. What does the pandemic treaty look like in your hometown? It looks like massive regional medical conglomerates. It looks like being asked to answer the same 15 questions every time you visit the doctor's office. Have you traveled out of town or out of the country recently? Do you have any COVID symptoms? Are you experiencing anxiety or depression? Do you have food in your refrigerator? Are you safe at home? Does your spouse beat you? Do you feel like you were born in the wrong body? I'm not even joking. These are questions they ask. You know what I'm talking about, don't you? Right, Summer? You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, it's gotten to the point where I don't even want to engage with going to the doctor anymore.
It's hard. You have to be very discerning and very careful about it. And Summer does that. She puts a lot of effort into trying to find the good people. Because I want to tell you, I don't want to be pessimistic and cynical. There are good people in that system. You can find them. I'm just telling you what the overall thing looks like. It's already there around you. Because the pharmaceutical industry is the pandemic treaty. They're one and the same. You know what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah, it's the global global governance through the platform of World Health. And they're also going to use, of course, the climate situation to bring it in also.
Why don't you run us some good graphics up there while I ran here?
Okay.
So you probably know what I'm talking about because you've probably recently experienced some version of that when you went for a checkup or your regular treatment of some kind. What does pandemic treaty, what does the World Health Organization look like in your hometown now? It looks like surveillance. It looks like a mental health check by an agency at someone's private home because they expressed a problematic viewpoint on social media, or because they were accused of hate speech by someone in their community. Maybe they were accused of hate speech by someone in their homeowners association. And that's how, that's the Agenda 21 side of it. It happens. It happens. It's happening now. And that's what the early stages of medical tyranny look like. These kinds of things will not be voted on. They will not be voted on, but some of them will become laws because it's for the common good. Therefore, they must be done to protect you from yourself and to protect people in the future. This process, how does it work? This process involves local people. This process involves your friends, perhaps your own family members, who advocate for these policies because they've been harmonized. They've been synthesized into the new progressive way of peace and safety. Non-governmental organizations, corporations, activist groups, otherwise known as stakeholders. These are people who've got some skin in the game. They might just lobby local and state officials to adopt policies that align with the World Economic Forum or the WHO or the UN. It's necessary. Don't you understand? We have to do it to protect you. Necessity is the cry of tyrants. This is how and who will enforce these policies in your hometown. Again, let me say, this is how and this is who will enforce these policies in your hometown. Let me say it again. Your family and friends are the ones who will enforce this. Maybe you will enforce it, knowingly or unknowingly. They will do it because maybe they're afraid to go against this system. So they go along to get along. Or maybe they become true believers and they feel that they have the moral imperative to support and enforce these policies for the good of the community, for the good of people in the future. Because the UN and the WHO, right? They really care about people in the future, don't they?
Not.
Now, some of the methods. One method these stakeholders use, how does it work, right? You want to know, how do they get this stuff done? How has Agenda 21 happened? How will the pandemic treaty be implemented in your hometown, whether it's ratified or not? One method these stakeholders use is pre-written legislation. This happens often when they give non-governmental organizations, activists, or perhaps a city council member, they show up with ready-made legislation. It's already written. One big method of Agenda 21 is regional supergovernance, where they have, maybe a dozen, maybe half a dozen or a dozen mayors and city planners from a particular area. They invite them to come to this big conference, right? Because it's important. You're going to feel important, and you're an important guy because you're on this regional supergovernance conference or whatever. And at that conference, they show, here, you need this in your hometown. You need this particular policy, right? You need this many bike lanes because it's going to create, it's going to free up traffic. I don't know, whatever. It's just a bunch of nonsense. But the thing is, the pre-written legislation already had the United Nations or the WHO's policy written right into the bill. Didn't come from the UN or the WHO. It came from the advocates. Nobody knows where it came from, except for the people who do know. It's a real time saver, right? This pre-written legislation. It's so convenient. Right? It's the easy way to bring forth new and progressive policies in your hometown. You should check it out sometime in your hometown. Find out how many non-governmental organizations are influencing your city planner, your mayor. How many non-governmental organizations are influencing your doctor's office? They're constantly engaging in public awareness campaigns. They're constantly handing out flyers. They know how to drum up support. They're out there beating the bricks, man. They're knocking on doors. They're building support for these initiatives. Green initiatives, smart growth, or medical checks policies, of which nobody seems to know from where they came. This creates the perception of widespread public demand when nobody really wants it. This is how consensus is manufactured. In fact, this is, again, how consent is manufactured. It wasn't the WHO that put that new mixed-use vaccine clinic apartment complex in the center of your city. You did. You did it. I did it. We've done it. It's our responsibility. And they make you think it was your idea. My friends, stop watching the WHO and the Trump circus every day and start keeping an eye on your local officials. Worry less about what Tedros is doing and worry more about what your city planner is doing, town manager, or whatever they call it in your area. Have you been to a city council meeting? In the United States, states and local governments have, again, they have a lot of autonomy, right? And that's a good thing. They can decide what policies they're going to allow into their states or not, specifically when it comes to public health, education, or environmental regulations, things like that. But these international organizations know this, and they will take advantage of this structure, knowing that what the federal government might not allow, maybe the state will, maybe the city will, especially if they don't know where it's coming from. They'll take advantage of this structure to leverage cities, whole regions of the nation. There's no need for Congress. In many cases, there's no need for a vote at all. It's in your best interest. Advocacy and lobbying are legitimate processes in our system of government, and they can and do serve some good outcomes. But when we, the people, when citizens are unaware of the hidden tyranny in their own backyard, the potential for manipulation or undue influence is strong, and it's going on now. These stakeholders, they're good at fundraising. They're good at putting pressure on local officials. They're good at creating strategic partnerships to persuade the wealthiest members of your community. They're good at persuading local officials to adopt these specific policies that they've been trained to push. And they're very good at shutting down dissent. For example, have you ever heard of the Delphi technique? Once again, Summer was showing the book earlier. I'll just show you. You need this book. You want to understand not just how Agenda 21 works, how will the WHO's policies probably be brought to your area? Same way, same framework. And when it comes down to debating these things in your hometown at the city council, developed by the Rand Corporation as a Cold War mind control technique, the Delphi technique is used to channel a group of people to accept a point of view that is imposed on them while convincing them it was their idea. Political gaslighting. Trained facilitators present a range of choices to a group, but they've already decided what the outcome is going to be beforehand. Money for these programs often comes from federal agencies, members of the President's Council on Sustainable Development. Grants from your local government. The Delphi technique is used in school board meetings, in trainings, at neighborhood association meetings, and other places where the organizers want to give the appearance that they have listened to the community and that they've incorporated your ideas into their plan. Truth is, they don't. You have no input. It's the perception of input. Only comments and observations that support the pre-approved plan will be supported. All others will be written on a big pad of paper and thrown in the garbage later. The illusion of public buy-in, the illusion of consensus is all that's needed. The organizers can later point, they can point to the agenda, to the paperwork and say, look, we We held a public meeting. 37 members, 37 residents attended. We listened to the public comments and complaints. And then the community approved the plan. Right? Funny when you find out who the facilitators of these meetings usually are. They're usually private consultants who've been professionally trained by these non-governmental organizations to do exactly this. They've been trained to fulfill the requirement that the project has been seen and supported by its citizens, to seed the audience and outnumber potential opponents, because this is war. You are experiencing, in this case, my friends, the new consensus. Control and manage of opinion, of outcomes. During the COVID-19 pandemic, World Health Organization guidelines influence public health measures at local levels. Although the guidelines were not legally enforceable, they still shaped the response through local health departments, state regulations. Also, UNESCO, Summer, we talked about UNESCO a lot here. UNESCO, it's the education branch of the United Nations. They also have their own sustainable development goals. UNESCO's Sustainable Development Goals have heavily influenced education policies at the local level in America through, drumroll please, NGOs and advocacy groups that promote curriculum changes or programs that ingrain these international shared goals into the minds of your children. So these policies influenced, created by international organizations, are regularly being implemented without due diligence, without adequate debate, without any real public support at all at the local level, right under your nose. This is how sovereignty is undermined. This is how the democratic process is undermined. They use our energy and our skills to reshape our towns and our cities, to reshape our whole nation in the image of the Geneva death cult. They're doing it. Stop watching Ted Ross and stop worrying about what he's up to. We need to defund it and withdraw from it and defund it, but we need to be paying attention to home. What do we do, right? That's the question. That's what everybody's waiting for. What in the world do I do about all this? Local and state governments must be held to account. They must be held to maintain transparency. And you, the person who lives there, you have to participate. You've got to be a part of the decision making. You have to critically evaluate the sources and motivations behind these proposed policies that come up in your city. This is why you don't have to, it's not hard. You go and you sit at the city council meeting, about an hour, maybe hour and a half, however often yours is, once a week, once a month, quarterly, whatever it is. What I'm trying to tell you, bring me back for a second. Folks, what I want you to know, and what Summer and I really want you to know, because we've really put a lot of heart. I mean, we really care about this topic. I have to say, this is a topic that is really, Summer's passionate about this. And her passion about it has made me passionate about it. You know, if any of you remember, we're here at this channel. It was Brad from Carolina channel back in the day when it got started. This was one of the first videos we ever did. I wrote Rosa Coy and asked her, "Can I read your first chapter on my channel?" And she said, "Yeah, just make sure you tell us what the book is and who the author is." So we've been on this. Summer's been researching and understanding this stuff for many, many years as well. Mm-hmm. So when we talk to you about this, you know, we're not new to this. This is where we get into topics.
We're old school when it comes to this information.
Yeah.
Yeah. Decade.
And I don't really know why. I don't know why it interested me back in the day. I don't know. It just seemed like there's something wrong, and I just want to know what it is. I want to know why these weird things are happening. Why is it that this walking, you know, we've got in towns, cities around here, you've got these really nice greenways, these nice paved walkways all throughout the city, up in a city close to us, this next city over. They've got one that goes on for miles and miles back through the country and all. How nice, right? Well, not really, because it is for now, but you know what happens there? Look at who paid for it, and look at who owns it now. That property that is that nice, pretty greenway now will never be owned by a private citizen again. Look at this beautiful thing we created that no one's ever going to own again. You see, you wonder, how will they make it so you own nothing and you're unhappy? That's one of the ways. Slowly, incrementally taking over property, bit by bit, moving people into mixed use. Yeah, using them in the mixed use.
Yeah.
Down at Carolina Beach, remember when we were down there? We saw those mixed use facility, or the condos and the apartments. Yeah. There are not that many people there. There are not enough people out there on that island to live in those places. So they're called islands of human habitation.
And they've got this technology called Haystack that uses AI to monitor any humans that might be living in rural areas. So they can know if there's, people out in the woods or some area that they don't want you to be. They're able to detect that through satellite and AI.
That's something. Goodness. Ladies and gentlemen, let me finish up with a bang here. I want to tell you straightforward the way it is. The greatest threat to your sovereignty, the greatest threat to American sovereignty is Americans. Inside the United States, World Health Organization recommendations, international health regulations, or any pandemic accord / convention, whatever it is, will be enforced through domestic laws under federal and state jurisdiction. The WHO needs to go, but it's not your first enemy. Legislative oversight of such recommendations from an international organization is a good idea. The truth is, regarding the policies and the guidance or the recommendations of the WHO, the UN, or the WEF, or any other international organization, the truth is, we are at the mercy of our government. That is why it is so important to be vigilant and actively engaged with your local and state government. Know your congressmen. Know who they are. Know your senators. Know who they are. Know their policies. Know how they vote on issues. Know how they vote on all the issues, but especially know how they vote on issues that matter to you. And especially know whether or not they have any kind of working knowledge about this relationship between the WHO and the United States, or the United Nations and the United States. Do they have any idea what a mixed use construction looks like? I remember what it's about. It's very convenient, right? Isn't it so nice to have your pizzeria downstairs? My friends, convenience will be the death of liberty. We don't need our pizza under us. It's okay to go a few miles for it. It's okay to cook. Listen, don't assume that because these politicians have a lot of hairspray and nice suits, don't assume because they have nice educations, don't assume they already know this stuff, because chances are they do not know this. Some do, some are in on it. Most have no idea. On a day-to-day basis, politicians are far more concerned with fundraising to win elections, to keep their positions, or bringing awareness to issues that they care about. And we've already seen this from the legislation that's been introduced over the past 2 years in different states and at the federal level, that most state and federal representatives do not have a clue. They don't have a working knowledge of these matters, these issues. When it comes to enforcement of policies imposed by international organizations, that was settled back when the United States co-founded and signed the charter and became a founding member of the United Nations and the World Health Organization. You might not like the sound of it, but that is the reality of the situation. Americans are the greatest threat to American sovereignty. What this tells us is that the first and most present danger to American sovereignty is the United States government. It always has been. Nothing's changed. If and when the World Health Assembly ratifies the WHO's Pandemic Accord or Convention, the United States is not going to lose its sovereignty or autonomy. It's going to go one of two ways. Either the recommendations are going to be disregarded, or the United States federal government or the state and local governments will decide to enforce them. Enshrine them into law, maybe. That's why you have to be engaged. You have to know what's going on. Because that is the true, clear and present danger to American sovereignty. If only it were clear to more of us, we could do something about it. And that's what you can do to help. That's what we're trying to do. This is about awareness. On September 17th, 1787, that was the final day of the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia. After an exhausting marathon of contentious debate and attending to every conceivable detail to build a wall around America that tyrants could never scale, the delegates, finally in agreement, had just signed one of the most significant documents in the history of the world. It was a covenant between the American people and their government, and it enshrined the inherent dignity of every person and their God-given right to live as free men and free women, free from tyranny, free to worship the one true God without persecution, and free to pursue life, liberty, and private property according to God's moral law. This Constitutional Convention was convened to address weaknesses in our young nation's first governing document, called the Articles of Confederation, or the Articles of Conspiracy, if you will. Those words mean the same thing. The delegates debated and eventually devised a new framework for government, which became the United States Constitution. This Constitution established a federal republic, a system of government by and for the people, where elected officials are accountable to you. After signing the newly drafted United States Constitution, the delegates emerged from Independence Hall tired. It was a long process. But almost surely they had a sense that they had participated in the creation of something beautiful, a true gift to the world that would that would draw millions to the shores of America in search of that dignity, in search of that opportunity to make their own way and to live free from the cold, sprawling fingers of oppression and dictatorship. But as the framers came out of the hall, there was also a sense of sober realization, acknowledgement. What the founders had created was not a get-out-of-jail-free card. It wasn't a free pass to an all-you-can-eat buffet. It wasn't liberty without responsibility. Whereas the masses had always been considered too ignorant, too disparate, or disengaged to govern themselves, history had almost exclusively seen monarchies, oligarchies, theocracies, and empires. There had been democracies and republics. They had been tried before, but this U.S. Constitution was unique. Enshrining a distinctive and enduring blend of federalism, separation of powers, and a written document, a written constitution, and a Bill of Rights that explicitly upheld and protected fundamental rights and individual liberties. This newborn Constitution was a unique form of government that placed the fate of the nation, the people, and their descendants in the hands of the people. A spectacular achievement, no doubt providentially guided by God. It was also a solemn occasion. The men spilling onto the street outside the hall on that warm Philadelphia afternoon were well aware that they had established a framework of a just government and that ultimate power would reside with the people. In other words, they all knew that the Constitution and the fundamental rights it secured would not survive if the people were not steadfast and vigilant in their personal duty to keep it. Some of you might know where I'm headed now. As it was recorded in the notes of a Maryland delegate to the convention, Dr. James McHenry, which gives us a first-hand account of this exchange witnessed outside Independence Hall on that day. A prominent Philadelphia woman, Ms. Powell, saw Ben Franklin leaving the venue, approached him to ask, "Well, doctor, what have we got? A republic or a monarchy?" To which old poor Richard responded with the heartening but sobering words, "A republic if you can keep it." What did he mean by that? A republic if I can keep it. Ben Franklin understood the fragility of the freedom that they had enshrined there. He understood that it would require a continuous effort from the people to participate actively in safeguarding their republic. Whether or not the people would be free from tyranny, whether or not the nation would be led by faithful leaders, and whether or not an international organization would overrun the country from the inside would be up to the people. Franklin's choice of words, "if you can keep it," that declares that there's a precarious, conditional nature of the American system of government. And at the same time demonstrates the fundamental difference between a republic and a monarchy. A republic depends on its citizens' vigilance, virtue, and participation to function effectively, whereas a monarchy does not rely on public involvement, only submission. A republic's life is not guaranteed. America and your freedoms are not guaranteed. It requires an ongoing effort to preserve the principles and institutions of it. Franklin's statement, "if you can keep it," is a call to action. It reminded Ms. Powell then, and all of us now, by application, that maintaining a republic involves more than just enjoying the benefits. It requires a commitment to civic duties like voting. And I know a lot of you don't like to hear that. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. It requires a commitment to civic duties like voting, like staying informed, like holding your leaders accountable. Freedom requires many things from its beneficiaries: wisdom, moral integrity, faith, just to name a few. Ben Franklin's declaration remains profoundly relevant right to this day. It's a reminder that in democracy, or in our case, constitutional republic, your freedoms are not self-sustaining. Preserving our way of life and the safety and prosperity of those who will come after us necessitates our constant, watchful, and eager participation. Right? We should be happy. We should be eager to participate in this gift. We shouldn't be cynical and surly. In an era where liberty has been redefined as personal satisfaction, the right to murder human beings waiting to be born, the right to demand that society affirm a person in their delusions and confusions about their sex and purpose in the world, a time when societal norms have drifted into a dark, arbitrary sense of morality, and America's institutions have been captured by those who seem to be possessed of demons. This charge from Ben Franklin is still the strongest and only call to action we should need. So all that's left to ask, will you remain complacent, complaining, waiting for the Calvary to come save the day, or will you consider the lives of those who will come after you? Will you consider the greatest temporal gift God has bestowed on any nation in history? Will you keep it? Is the question. And that's all I have for you tonight. Summer, is there anything you'd like to add?
That's a lot.
That was a lot of information. That was probably too much information. Let's do it again.
Yeah, definitely. Well, we have to. We have to talk about it again, and we will. And we're going to keep an eye on things. And it's just really been a great exercise to dig into all of that information. And we encourage you to head over to our Substack to check that article out. We've got original source documents, primary source documents, and a really great argument for you to check out over there. And we put a lot of work into it, and we think it's super valuable, and we'd love to hear back from you too. Like what Brad said earlier, if you think that we're off somehow, by all means, hit us up, give us an email, let us know, like send us over some sources, maybe something that we're not seeing. But from what we can tell, it really does look like we're in a situation where, once again, there's this movement that is, you know, they're just not getting it right. Like, they're not assessing it correctly, and they're not giving the advice that they should be giving. And that's quite alarming. But by the same token, I mean, can we really be surprised about that? No, we're not really surprised about that. But we just are going to continue on and just stay in the truth no matter what.
Yeah, I just noticed something on our analytics. This is amazing. This is something. So in our show here, as we're cruising along, and we're talking, you know, we're talking about
the issues that we're talking about.
Issues, yeah, you know, just pretty much the instant we start challenging people to get involved, to do something.
Oh yeah, everybody leaves.
Not everybody.
A lot of people.
It's not that many people watching to begin with. But we have the small core of our audience that's always here has always been more as loyal as any group.
Yeah, very loyal. You guys
there.
are very loyal.
Yeah.
Thank you for sticking with us.
Yeah, you make it easy to come back and do this every time. But yeah, it dropped off significantly, probably about 20% when we started challenging people to be involved. All we're doing is asking you to care about the gift the Lord has bestowed on us, which is the opportunity to be free, opportunity to worship freely. Do you understand that people are killed for honoring Christ, for honoring His name, for proclaiming His name? Things that we just completely take for granted. Maybe this is an occasion where God's going to take all that away so we can learn to appreciate it. I submit to you that we respond in faith so that perhaps that doesn't happen to us. Jeremiah 29:7 says, "Seek the peace and prosperity of the city to which I have carried you into exile." You might think America is corrupt. So did Daniel. Daniel knew Babylon was corrupt. He didn't hide out. He didn't run away. He became one of the governors. Pray to the Lord for that city, because if it prospers, you will prosper too. Titus 3:1, remind the people to be subject to rulers and authorities, to be obedient, to be ready to do whatever is good. Proverbs 29:2, when the righteous thrive, the people rejoice. But when the wicked rule, the people groan. Whose fault is it? You can blame God. wouldn't do that. 1 Timothy 2:1-2. I urge then, first of all, that petitions, prayers, intercession, and thanksgivings be made for all people, for kings and all those in authority, that we may live peaceful and quiet lives in all godliness and holiness. Hey, I'll take that life. I want that. And the Bible has told us how to have it. Pray for those who persecute you. Bless and do not curse. If you can't bless those who curse you, you don't have the blessing of God resting on you. And I know it's hard. I struggle with it. We all struggle with that. But understand, as James tells us in the first chapter, these trials that come to us from the outside are there to form us spiritually. When we respond in faith to these trials, and in this case, it means praying for these rulers. It doesn't mean hating on them. Praying for them. Calling them out in their sins, calling them out in their wickedness for sure. But petitions, prayers, intercessions, and thanksgivings be made for all people, for kings, and those in authority, that we may live peaceful, quiet lives. I want that. I want that for you. I want that for those who come after us. I want a peaceful and quiet life, and we have that opportunity. All right, my friends. Summer, is there anything you want to say to wrap it up?
That's all. Thank you guys for being with us.
Yeah, thanks for being here tonight, and we look forward to seeing you again very soon. Look, the reason you haven't seen us much lately is we have been researching, reading, and writing. I've got another something here that Summer and I have been writing, and Summer and I we work on this stuff together, and I'm really excited about the next topic that we got. Necessity is the Cry of Tyrants is the working title of it.
It's going to be good.
And I actually have we have an outline for a book, a loose outline for a book, and it's a long way from any kind of final product, but there is an outline, so we kind of have an idea of what it might look like. And it's topics like this, but what I have to learn to do is to say it more succinctly, not 2.5 hours.
But, it's a really big, huge topic. We deal with some really huge topics. So in all fairness, it takes every moment of that to explain things, I think, to patiently walk people through these issues.
Yeah, I can remember a time back in probably, when I was working with Clint Richardson for a little bit. That wasn't that long ago, though. That was back in 2017, 2018, 2019. Some of you might know who Clint Richardson is, but he's a bulldog. He's one of the godfathers of the truth movement. He wouldn't like that title, but anyway. I can remember this urge, this desire, this fire in the gut to do this, to do exactly what we've done here tonight, which is to tell people what we're seeing, filtering it all through the lens of ultimate truth, the scriptures, and reporting this to people and then telling them, here's what we can do, because we do have the answer. We're the only people who do have the answer. So I urge you, I encourage you to take this seriously.
The Christian worldview. We have the truth.
We know what to do. We don't have to wonder how to respond. I urge then, first of all, petitions, prayers, intercessions, and thanksgivings be made for all people, for kings, and all those in authority, so that we may live peaceful, quiet lives in all godliness and holiness. God bless you, my friends, and we'll see you again here very soon.
God bless you.
The hammer comes down and beats you over the head for the rest of your life with a big national security stick. And so that people learn to duck their head and not speak up, because bad idea now.
This is the emergency broadcast system. This is not a test. Repeat, this is not a test. Citizens are advised to take the following steps.
Find us, armoroftruth.net.
In the age of technocracy, scientism, and pop atheism.
Faith is resistance.
Nietzsche, of course, announced the death of God and called for the birth of the Übermensch, the Superman.